Your time is over, old lady. My son sneered. So I took back everything I gave. The silence in my house now isn't empty. It's full of choices I should have made years ago. Sometimes the greatest act of love is learning when to stop giving. It to those who've forgotten its worth. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been treated like your age makes you invisible. Like your years of sacrifice somehow make you disposable. My name is Margaret Eleanor Whitman. I'm 74 years old, and I live in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Or at least I did until 3 months ago. What happened to me didn't just break my heart. It taught me who really deserved my love. I've been thinking about this story for weeks. Now, wondering how to tell it to you, my dear listeners at Granny's Tales. You understand what it's like to be dismissed, don't you? To have decades of wisdom treated like outdated software that needs replacing. Well, sit with me for a while. Pour yourself some tea. This one's going to take some time. It started on a Tuesday morning in March, the kind of day when winter finally loosens its grip and you can smell spring hiding in the wind. I was in my kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd made 37 years of birthday cakes, packed countless school lunches, and hosted every holiday dinner. When my son, Michael, walked in without knocking. Again. "Mom, we need to talk." Those 5 words. In my experience, nothing good ever follows "we need to talk," especially when it comes from a 48-year-old man who still expects his laundry folded and his problems solved by someone else. I was making my morning coffee, the ritual that's kept me grounded since your grandfather passed 12 years ago. Real coffee, mind you, not that instant nonsense. I ground the beans myself, measured the water, waited for that first perfect drip. Small ceremonies matter when you're my age. They're what separate existing from living. "Good morning to you too, Michael," I said, not turning around. "Coffee's almost ready if you'd like some." "I don't have time for coffee." His voice carried that particular brand of impatience that I'd learned to recognize, the tone that said I was an inconvenience, rather than the woman who brought him into this world. "We've been talking, and we think it's time." We. That would be Michael and his wife, Patricia, who'd never quite forgiven me for existing. And probably his sister Jennifer, who lived in Phoenix and called twice a year, on my birthday and Christmas, like checking items off a duty list. I turned around, slowly, still holding my coffee mug. Michael stood in my doorway wearing his expensive suit, the one I'd helped pay for when he started his consulting business. His hair was thinning now, and there were lines around his eyes that made him look older than his years. When had my little boy become this stranger who barged into my home and spoke to me like I was a problem to be solved? "Time for what, exactly?" He shifted his weight, and I caught that familiar flash of irritation that crossed his face whenever I didn't immediately understand what he wanted. "Time for you to move into a facility. Somewhere with people your own age. Activities. Medical. Staff. You're 74, Mom. You can't keep living alone in this big house." The coffee maker finished its brewing cycle with a gentle sigh, the only sound in the sudden silence. I took a sip of my coffee, black, hot, perfect, and studied my son's face. Really looked at him, maybe for the first time in years. "I see," I said finally. "And where exactly did this decision come from?" "It's not a decision. It's a discussion. Patricia found this great place in Des Moines. Sunset Manor. It's got all the amenities. Dining room, library, organized activities. You'd have your own apartment, but there'd be people around. Medical help if you need it." I almost laughed. Sunset Manor. How perfectly they'd packaged my obsolescence with a pretty name and a brochure full of smiling seniors playing bingo. "And what makes you think I need medical help?" "Mom, come on. You're not getting any younger? What if you fall? What if you have a heart attack? Who would know? Mrs. Henderson next door is almost as old as you are. Mrs. Henderson was 79 and ran a 5-mile loop every morning. She'd also been my closest friend for 23 years, but I didn't bother correcting him. In Michael's world, anyone over 60 was essentially an invalid waiting to happen. I had my physical last month, I said calmly. Dr. Martinez says I'm healthier than most people half my age. My blood pressure is perfect. My cholesterol is better than yours, and I can still outwork most people I know. That's not the point. Then, what is the point, Michael? He ran his hand through his thinning hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was caught in a lie. Look, this house is too much for you. The maintenance, the yard work, the stairs. And frankly, it's worth a fortune. You're sitting on over $400,000 in equity. That money could pay for the best care facility in the state, with plenty left over for your future needs. And there it was. The truth, finally dressed up in concern for my well-being. The house, our family home, where Michael and Jennifer had taken their first steps, lost their first teeth, brought their first dates, was worth more than my comfort, my independence, my right to choose where I spent my remaining years. I see, I said again. I had a habit of saying that when I needed time to think, when the words I really wanted to say would only make things worse. And you've discussed this with Jennifer? She agrees. We all think it's best. We all think. As if I was a senile old woman who couldn't be trusted to make her own decisions. As if 74 years of life experience counted for nothing compared to their 40-something wisdom. I set my coffee mug down on the counter with the kind of careful control that comes from years of practice in not breaking things when you're angry. Well, Michael, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not ready to move anywhere. His face flushed the way it used to when he was 7, and I told him he couldn't have ice cream for breakfast. Mom, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to help. You here? No, I said, and my voice was quiet, but firm. You're trying to help yourselves. You want my house sold so you can have your inheritance now, while you're young enough to enjoy it. You want me tucked away somewhere convenient where you can visit twice a year and feel good about being dutiful children. That's not... Don't lie to me, Michael. I've been your mother for 48 years. I know when you're lying. The flush deepened, and for a moment I saw the petulant child he'd once been. But then his expression hardened, and he became someone I barely recognized. Your time is over, old lady, he said, his voice cold and dismissive. Whether you like it or not, you can't live in the past forever. Jennifer and I have power of attorney. We can make this decision with or without your cooperation. The words hit me like a physical blow. Old lady, said with such contempt, such casual cruelty. This was my son, the boy I'd nursed through pneumonia, taught to ride a bicycle, held when his first girlfriend broke his heart, the man I'd helped through college, supported through his early career struggles, loved unconditionally for nearly 5 decades, and he'd just called me an old lady like it was a curse word. Get out, I said quietly. Mom, get out of my house. Now. He stood there for a moment, perhaps realizing he'd gone too far. But instead of apologizing, instead of taking back those awful words, he straightened his shoulders and walked toward the door. Fine. But this isn't over. We'll be back with the paperwork. You can do this the easy way or the hard way, but it's going to happen. The door slammed behind him, and I stood alone in my kitchen, surrounded by 40 years of memories and the smell of fresh coffee gone cold. I didn't cry. I'd learned long ago that tears are a luxury you can't afford when someone's trying to take everything you have. Instead, I picked up my phone and called my attorney. "Robert," I said when he answered. "It's Margaret Whitman. I need to see you today. It's urgent." Robert Jameson had been handling my legal affairs since your grandfather died. He was a good man, honest and thorough. The kind of lawyer who still returned phone calls and remembered his clients' names. More importantly, he was only 55, young enough to understand technology, old enough to respect it. I hung up and looked around my kitchen. Really looked at it. The handmade tiles I'd spent 3 months choosing. The window over the sink where I'd watched my children grow up in the backyard. The breakfast nook where your grandfather and I had shared our morning coffee for 32 years. Every corner held a memory. Every surface told a story. They thought they could take this from me. They thought being 74 made me helpless, compliant, ready to shuffle off to whatever corner they'd chosen for me. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Robert's office was downtown, in one of those beautiful old buildings that Cedar Falls hadn't yet torn down to make room for chain stores and parking lots. I arrived 15 minutes early, partly because I'm always early to important appointments, but mostly because I needed time to compose myself. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah who always asked about my garden, seemed surprised to see me. "Mrs. Whitman, Mr. Jameson is just finishing up with another client. Can I get you some coffee?" "That would be lovely, dear. Black, please." I sat in one of the leather chairs that had probably been there since the Carter administration and tried to organize my thoughts. I've always been a list maker, someone who approaches problems methodically. Your grandfather used to tease me about it. "Margaret and her lists," he'd say fondly. She'd make a list for making lists if she could. So, I made a mental list. What did I know? What did I need to find out? What were my options? What I knew was limited. Michael and Jennifer claimed to have power of attorney, though I couldn't remember signing any such document. I knew they wanted me in a care facility and my house sold. I knew they felt entitled to make decisions about my life without consulting me. What I needed to find out was whether they actually had the legal right to do what they threatened. What my options were remained to be seen. "Mrs. Whitman?" Robert appeared in the doorway, tall and silver-haired, with the kind of calm presence that made you feel like everything would be manageable. "Please, come in." His office was exactly what a lawyer's office should be. Walls, lined with law books, a massive oak desk, family photos that showed a man who understood the importance of what mattered. I settled into the chair across from his desk and accepted another cup of coffee. "Now then," he said, pulling out a thick file folder. "You mentioned power of attorney. Let's start with what your children have told you." I repeated Michael's threat, watching Robert's face carefully. He was good at keeping his expression neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes when I mentioned their plans to force me into a facility. "Margaret," he said when I finished. "I've been your lawyer for 12 years. I have copies of every legal document you've ever signed in my files. You have never at any time granted power of attorney to your children or anyone else." The relief was so intense I had to set down my coffee cup to keep from spilling it. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely." "Certain. You're thinking of the healthcare directive you signed after Harold died, which only comes into effect if you're declared mentally incompetent by medical professionals. That's a very different thing from general power of attorney, and it certainly doesn't give them the right to force you to sell your home or move into a facility. So they were lying, either lying or genuinely mistaken about what documents they have access to. Without seeing what they're referring to, I can't say which." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Margaret, what they're threatening isn't just ethically wrong. It could constitute elder abuse. Have they made any other threats? Attempted to restrict your access to your finances? Not yet. But Robert, they seem so confident." Michael spoke like it was a done deal. Confidence isn't the same as legal authority. And frankly, even if you had granted them power of attorney, that doesn't give them unlimited control over your life. Power of attorney is meant to help people who can't make decisions for themselves, not to override the decisions of people who are fully competent. I felt something loosening in my chest, a tension I hadn't realized I was carrying. So, what do I do? Well, first, let's make sure your estate planning documents are exactly what you want them to be. I assume your will still leaves everything divided equally between Michael and Jennifer. Yes, though after this morning, I'm reconsidering that decision. Robert nodded thoughtfully. That's your right, of course. But before you make any changes based on anger, let's talk about your options. You could modify your will, certainly. You could also set up a trust, create specific conditions for inheritance, or make charitable donations. The point is, it's your money and your choice. What about the house? What about it? It's your house, Margaret. You can live in it until the day you die if that's what you choose. No one can force you to sell it, and no one can force you to move out of it as long as you're competent to make your own decisions. I sat back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, the full weight of my own power. It was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. Robert, I want to make some changes. I thought you might. What did you have in mind? That night I sat in your grandfather's study, the room I'd barely entered since he died, and thought about power. Not the kind of power that comes from bullying or threatening people, but the kind that comes from understanding exactly what you control and what you don't. The study still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco, even after all these years. His books lined the walls. Histories and biographies, novels by authors whose names I could barely pronounce. The complete works of Mark Twain that he'd read aloud to Michael and Jennifer when they were small. I'd kept everything exactly as he'd left it, like a shrine to a man who'd understood that true strength was gentle, that real power was generous. But gentleness and generosity only work when they're appreciated. When they're taken for granted, they become weaknesses that others exploit. I opened the desk drawer where he'd kept his important papers, now mostly empty except for a few photographs, and the fountain pen he'd used to sign our mortgage papers 30 years ago. It was a beautiful pen, heavy and substantial, the kind they don't make anymore. I picked it up and found a piece of his old stationery. "Dear Michael and Jennifer," I wrote, then stopped. What was I trying to say? That I was hurt? That I was disappointed? That I'd spent my entire adult life putting their needs before my own, only to be dismissed as an inconvenient old woman? I crumpled up the paper and started again. My dear children, by the time you read this, you'll have learned that certain assumptions you've made about your inheritance were incorrect. I want you to understand that the decisions I've made weren't made in anger, but in clarity. For 48 years, I have been your mother first, and myself second. I sacrificed career opportunities to be home when you needed me. I went without things I wanted, so you could have things you needed. I supported your dreams, your mistakes, your successes, and your failures with equal love and commitment. I did. These things gladly because that's what mothers do. We give without counting the cost because love isn't supposed to be transactional. But love isn't supposed to be one-sided either. I stopped writing and looked out the window at the garden. Your grandfather and I had planted together. The daffodils were starting to bloom. Bright yellow promises that winter always ends, that new growth is always possible. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I almost didn't answer it. It was nearly 9 o'clock, late for social calls, but something made me pick up. Mom. It was Jennifer, and she sounded uncertain, almost nervous. I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not too late, sweetheart. How are you?" I'm confused. Michael called me this afternoon. He said you were upset about our suggestion that you consider assisted living." Our suggestion. Such diplomatic language for what had actually been a threat. "I see. And what do you think about this suggestion?" There was a long pause. "Mom, we're just worried about you. Living alone in that big house, so far from family. We love you, and we want what's best for you." I closed my eyes and tried to hear my daughter. Really hear her. Was this genuine concern dressed up in unfortunate language? Or was this more of the same manipulation Michael had tried this morning? "Jennifer, can I ask you something?" "Of course. When was the last time you visited me?" Another pause. Longer this time. It's been a while. Work has been so busy, and the flights are expensive." "It's been 14 months," I said. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could almost feel her discomfort through the phone. "But Mom, what if something happens? What if you fall, or have a medical emergency?" "What if you fall, Jennifer? What if you have a medical emergency? Do you think being 45 makes you immune to accidents or illness?" "That's different. Is it? Or is it just more convenient to believe that age automatically equals helplessness?" She was quiet for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then, in a small voice, "Maybe we approached this wrong. Maybe you did. What do you want us to do?" It was the first time either of my children had asked me what I wanted, and the question caught me off guard. What did I want? "I want you to visit me," I said finally. "Not to check up on me or evaluate my living situation, but to spend time with me. I want you to ask me about my life, my health, my plans, and then listen to my answers. I want you to treat me like a competent adult who happens to be your mother, not like a problem that needs solving." "Okay," she said, and I heard something in her voice that sounded like relief. I could come for a long weekend next month. Spring break is coming up. I'd like that. And Mom, I'm sorry. For not visiting more, for making assumptions, for letting Michael speak for both of us when he shouldn't have. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet study and felt something shift inside me. Jennifer had heard me, had acknowledged her mistakes, had asked what I wanted. Maybe there was hope for rebuilding our relationship on more equal ground. But Michael was going to be a different story. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I started with my finances. I've always been careful with money. Your grandfather's insurance and my teacher's pension, combined with smart investments and the house that had tripled in value over 30 years, had left me quite comfortable. But comfortable and wealthy are different things, and I'd never really thought of myself as having significant assets until Robert started talking about estate planning. 400,000 in the house, another 600,000 in various retirement accounts and investments, nearly 200,000 in savings and CDs, over $1 million all told. No wonder Michael was so eager to have me declared incompetent. I made appointments with my banker, my investment advisor, and my insurance agent. If my children thought they could steamroll me because I was elderly and presumably naive about financial matters, they were about to get an education. My banker, a pleasant young man named David, who'd been handling my accounts for several years, was surprised by my request for a detailed financial review. "Mrs. Whitman, is everything all right?" "You've never asked for this kind of comprehensive overview before." "Everything's fine, David. I'm just making some changes, and I want to understand exactly where I stand financially. He spread the papers across his desk like a roadmap of my life's work. Every dollar represented time I'd spent teaching high. School English, every investment was a small luxury I'd forgone. Every account balance was proof of decades of careful, responsible living. "You're in excellent financial shape," he said, and I could hear the slight amazement in his voice. "Very conservative investments, minimal debt, excellent credit rating. You could maintain your current lifestyle for another 20 years easily. And if I wanted to make some charitable donations, you could be quite generous and still maintain your security. Did you have something specific in mind?" I did, but I wasn't ready to share it yet. "I'm exploring options. Thank you for the review." Next was the investment advisor, a sharp woman named Carol who'd been managing my portfolio since your grandfather died. She was even more enthusiastic about my financial position. "Margaret, you're what we call an ideal client. You save consistently, you don't panic during market downturns, and you understand the difference between risk and recklessness. Your portfolio could support a very comfortable retirement for decades to come. What if I wanted to establish a trust or foundation?" Her eyes lit up. "Oh, that's interesting. For your children?" "Partially, but I'm also thinking about other beneficiaries." We spent an hour discussing options, structures, tax implications. By the time I left her office, I had a much clearer picture of what was possible. The insurance agent was my final stop, and the most illuminating. Jim Morrison had sold me my homeowner's policy 15 years ago, and we'd developed the kind of professional friendship that comes from years of honest dealing. "Margaret," he said as we reviewed my coverage, "I have to ask, is someone pressuring you to make changes to your policies?" "What makes you ask that?" "Because in 30 years of selling insurance, I've learned to recognize the signs of elder financial abuse. Adult children who suddenly become very interested in their parents' assets, who push for power of attorney, who suggest that living independently is too dangerous. It's more common than you'd think." I sat back in my chair, struck by his directness. "And what do you usually advise people in that situation?" "Document everything. Keep your own records. Don't sign anything you don't fully understand. And remember that being someone's parent doesn't make you their property." That evening, I called my friend Dorothy in Phoenix. We'd taught together for 20 years before she retired and moved to be closer to her daughter. And if anyone would understand my situation, it would be her. "Margaret." Her voice was warm and familiar, like a favorite song. "How lovely to hear from you. How are you doing?" "I'm having some family difficulties," I said, and told her the story. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then Dorothy started laughing. Not the kind of laughter that comes from amusement, but the bitter kind that comes from painful recognition. "Oh, honey," she said, "I am so sorry, but I'm not surprised." "What do you mean?" "I mean, this is the story of every woman our age. We spend our lives giving and giving and giving. And then when we finally need to take care of ourselves, we're told we're selfish. When we stand up for ourselves, we're called difficult. When we refuse to be pushed around, we're accused of being stubborn or senile. So what did you do?" "Well, my situation was different. Karen, my daughter, she really was trying to help, not trying to control me. But I had to make it. It started small. I bought myself flowers for the kitchen table, not because it was a special occasion, but because I liked flowers, and I'd spent 60 years waiting for someone else to buy them for me. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center, something I'd wanted to do for years, but had never found time for between everyone else's needs. I also started paying attention to the people in my life who actually saw me as a person, rather than a burden or an asset. Mrs. Henderson next door, who brought me vegetables from her garden and never once suggested I was too old to live alone. The young man at the grocery store who always asked about my day, and meant it. The librarian who recommended books and remembered what I'd enjoyed. These people, I realized, were my real family. Not because we shared blood, but because we shared respect. A week after my conversation with Jennifer, she called to confirm her visit. "I'll fly in Friday evening and leave Monday morning," she said. I thought maybe we could do some of the things we used to do when I was little. Remember how we used to go to that little cafe downtown for lunch? Patterson's Bakery. It's still there. Really? I'd love to go there again. And maybe we could visit the library? I always loved going there with you. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely happy about seeing one of my children. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Mom? I've been thinking about what you said. About asking what you want instead of assuming what you need. So I want to ask, what do you want from this visit? The question caught me off guard again. I want to spend time with my daughter. I want us to talk to each other like adults who care about each other. I want you to see that I'm still the same person I always was. Just older. You are, aren't you? She said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I think I forgot that somewhere along the way. But if Jennifer was coming around, Michael was, doubling down. 2 days before Jennifer's visit, he showed up again, this time with Patricia in tow. I was in the garden, planting the tomatoes I'd started from seed in the kitchen window. It was a beautiful spring morning, the kind that makes you grateful to be alive and healthy enough to dig in the dirt. I heard the car pull up but didn't stop what I was doing. Let them come to me for once. Mom. Michael's voice carried across the yard, and I could hear the irritation already. What are you doing out here? I looked up from the tomato seedling. I was carefully transplanting. I'm gardening, Michael. It's what I do every spring. You shouldn't be on your knees like that. What if you can't get up? What if you hurt your back? Patricia stood beside him, her arms crossed, her expression suggesting she'd rather be anywhere else. She'd never liked me much, though she'd been polite enough for the sake of family harmony. I'd always suspected she saw me as competition for Michael's attention, which would have been flattering if it weren't so ridiculous. I've been gardening for 50 years, I said calmly, brushing dirt off my hands. I think I know my limitations. That's exactly the problem, Michael said. You think you know your limitations, but you don't. You're 74 years old. You have no business living alone, and you certainly have no business crawling around in the dirt like a teenager. I stood up slowly, partly because my knees did protest a bit, but mostly because I wanted to make it clear that I was perfectly capable of standing up. Is there something you needed, Michael? He pulled a manila folder from under his arm. We've been to see a lawyer, a real lawyer, not that old man you've been using. We have options. Oh. We can petition the court to have you declared mentally incompetent. We have evidence that you're making irrational decisions, putting yourself at risk, refusing reasonable care. I felt a familiar chill, the same one I'd felt during his first visit. But this time, I was prepared. And what evidence would that be? Living alone at your age, refusing to consider safer housing options, making impulsive financial decisions. He opened the folder and pulled out several papers. We know you've been moving money around, meeting with lawyers and financial advisors. That's exactly the kind of erratic behavior that suggests diminished capacity. Patricia shifted uncomfortably beside him, and I caught her glancing at me with what might have been sympathy, or maybe embarrassment. It occurred to me that she might not be as enthusiastic about this confrontation as Michael was. Michael, I said, and my voice was steady despite the anger building inside me. Managing my own finances isn't erratic behavior. It's responsible behavior. Meeting with professionals to review my estate planning isn't impulsive. It's exactly what any competent adult should do. You're being manipulated by people who want your money. The only people who want my money, I said, are standing in my garden right now. Patricia actually flinched at that, and I saw her touch Michael's arm. A subtle gesture that said, maybe they should leave. But Michael was too angry, too committed to his narrative to back down. We're trying to protect you. No, you're trying to control me. There's a difference. Mom, you're being ridiculous. We're your children. We love you. We want what's best for you. And what's best for me is giving up my home, my independence, and my right to make my own decisions so you can have your inheritance a few years early. It's not about inheritance. Isn't it? I stepped closer to him, and for just a moment, I saw the little boy he'd once been. The one who'd lied about breaking the neighbor's window, who'd sworn he hadn't taken money from my purse. Michael, you've lied to me about having power of attorney. You've threatened to have me declared incompetent. You've barged into my home and called me an old lady like it was an insult. What exactly am I supposed to think this is about? Huh. Face was red now. That familiar flush of anger and embarrassment. Fine. You want the truth? You're wasting our inheritance. You're sitting on over $1 million that could be put to better use. Jennifer and I have families, mortgages, college funds to think about. You don't need all this money. You don't need this big house. You could live comfortably on half of what you have, and leave the rest to the people who'll actually use it. And there it was. The truth. Finally stripped of all pretense and concern for my well-being. I see, I said. Thank you for your honesty. So you'll consider it? Moving to a facility, simplifying your finances? I looked at my son. Really looked at him. The entitled expression, the assumption that he could bully me into compliance, the complete lack of interest in what I might want or need. This wasn't the boy I'd raised. This was someone I barely recognized. No, I said. I won't consider it. This is my life, my money, my house, and my decision. You have no legal authority over me, no moral right to make demands, and no claim on anything I own until I'm dead. His face went white, then red again. Mom, get off my property, I said quietly. Both of you, and don't come back unless you're invited. You can't. I can, and I am. This is my house, my land, and I'm telling you to leave. Now. Patricia was already walking toward their car, and after a moment of stunned silence, Michael followed her. As they drove away, I stood in my garden surrounded by the tomato plants I'd grown from. Half of my remaining assets will establish the Harold and Margaret Whitman Education Foundation, providing scholarships for first-generation college students. Young people who understand the value of opportunity because they haven't had everything handed to them. The other half will be divided as follows. Jennifer, because you showed me the respect of asking what I wanted and apologizing for your assumptions, you will receive $200,000. Michael, because you showed me nothing but contempt and greed, you will receive $1. This isn't punishment. It's consequences. I'm not obligated to reward behavior that demeans and dismisses me simply because we share DNA. If either of you chooses to contest this will, the entire amount designated for inheritance will go directly to charity instead. I hope that someday you'll understand that treating people with dignity isn't about their age, their usefulness to you, or what they can give you. It's about recognizing their fundamental worth as human beings. With love that was never conditional, even when yours was. Mother. I sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it in my desk drawer. It would be delivered to them after my death, along with copies of the new will I'd signed that afternoon. But I wasn't planning on dying anytime soon. I had too much living left to do. Jennifer's visit the following weekend was everything I'd hoped for. She arrived Friday evening with flowers from the Phoenix airport and a genuine smile. The first time I'd seen her look truly happy to see me in years. "Mom," she said, hugging me tightly. "I've missed you. Really missed you." "I've missed you, too, sweetheart." We spent Saturday morning at Patterson's Bakery, just as she'd suggested. The young woman behind the counter, probably the granddaughter of the Patterson who'd run it when Jennifer was small, was delighted to hear about our history with the place. "My grandmother always talked about the families who came here. For generations," she said, boxing up the same cinnamon rolls Jennifer had loved as a child. She said that's what made a business worth having, becoming part of people's stories. We took our coffee and rolls to the same corner table we'd always preferred, the one by the window where you could watch people walking by on Main Street. Jennifer looked around with wonder. "It's exactly the same," she said. "I mean, the colors are different, and the menu's bigger, but it feels exactly the same." "Some things shouldn't change," I said. "Some things are worth preserving." She looked at me thoughtfully. "Like you living in the house where we grew up?" "Like me living where I choose to live, yes. Mom, I owe you an apology. A bigger one than I gave you on the phone." I waited, sipping my coffee and watching her gather her thoughts. I let Michael speak for me because it was easier than having my own opinion. I let him convince me that you were becoming, I don't know, fragile, I guess. Incapable. But seeing you now, talking to you. She shook her head. "You're exactly the same sharp, capable woman you've always been. If anything, you seem more sure of yourself than I remember." "Age does that sometimes," I said. "When you realize you don't have unlimited time left, you stop wasting it on things that don't matter. Like worrying about what other people think you should do." "Exactly." We spent the rest of the morning at the library, where I introduced Jennifer to the head librarian, Mrs. Chen. I'd been volunteering there twice a week, helping with the literacy program for adult learners. Jennifer seemed genuinely surprised by this. "You never mentioned you were volunteering," she said as we walked between the stacks. "You never asked what I was doing with my time." She stopped walking and looked at me. "I assumed you were just, I don't know, watching TV and gardening and being lonely." "I'm many things, Jennifer, but I'm not lonely. I have a full life, good friends, meaningful work. I'm probably busier now than I was when you were children. And happier." I considered the question seriously. "Different kind of happy. When you were small, my happiness was tied up in yours. Now it's my own." That afternoon, we worked in the garden together. Jennifer had forgotten how much she'd enjoyed helping me plant when she was young, but her hands seemed to remember the motions. How to make the holes just deep enough, how to gently firm the soil around the seedlings. "I was thinking," she said as we planted the last of the marigolds, "maybe I could visit more often. I mean, if you'd like that." "I'd love that. And maybe I could call more often too. Not just on holidays, but actually call to talk." "I'd love that even more." She sat back on her heels, dirt on her hands and a streak of soil across her cheek. She looked like the little girl I remembered, the one who'd helped me plant her first garden when she was 6 years old. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you angry with us? With Michael and me, I mean. For how we've treated you?" I thought about it carefully. "I'm disappointed. I'm hurt. But angry? No, not anymore. Anger is what you feel when you think you can change something. I've accepted that Michael may never see me as anything more than an obstacle to his inheritance. But you're here, asking questions, listening to answers. That gives me hope. What about Michael? Is there any hope for him? There's always hope. But it has to come from him. I can't love him into respecting me. I tried that for 48 years. Sunday morning we went to church together. Something we hadn't done since Jennifer was in high school. Pastor Williams, who'd known our family for decades, was delighted to see her. "Jennifer, how wonderful. Your mother talks about you often." "She does?" "Oh, yes. She's very proud of your work, your independence. She lights up when she mentions your phone calls." After church, we sat in the garden with our coffee and the Sunday paper, comfortable in each other's company in a way we hadn't been in years. "Mom," Jennifer said finally, "I want to tell you something." "I'm listening. I'm proud of you. For standing up to Michael, for not letting us bully you into giving up your life. I'm proud that you're my mother." The words hit me like a physical embrace. When was the last time one of my children had said they were proud of me? When was the last time I'd felt truly seen and appreciated by the people I'd loved most? "Thank you," I said, and my voice was thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you know." Monday morning came too soon. As I drove Jennifer to the airport, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "This won't be 14 months again," she said. "I promise." "I'll hold you to that." "And Mom? If Michael keeps being difficult, you don't have to put up with it just because he's your son. You don't owe him anything more than you've already given." I glanced at her in surprise. "What makes you say that?" "Because I spent this weekend watching you, really watching you. And I realized something. You've spent your whole life taking care of other people. Maybe it's time someone took care of you for a change. I'm taking care of myself just fine." "I know you are, but you shouldn't have to defend your right to do it." After I dropped her off, I drove home through the spring morning feeling lighter than I had in years. One relationship saved, or at least, on the path to healing. It was more than I dared hope for. But Michael wasn't finished with me yet. The call came 3 days later, while I was reading in the garden with a cup of afternoon tea. Robert's voice was tense in a way I'd never heard before. "Margaret, we need to talk. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" "What's wrong?" "Michael has filed a petition with the court requesting guardianship over you. He's claiming diminished mental capacity and presenting evidence that you're making erratic financial decisions." The teacup rattled against the saucer as I set it down. "Can he do that?" "He can try. Whether he can succeed is another matter entirely. But Margaret, this is serious. If the court grants his petition, he would have complete control over your finances, your living situation, your medical care, everything. What do I need to do?" "Fight back. And I mean really fight back. Are you prepared for that?" I looked around my garden, at the home I'd built with love and intention, at the life I'd created for myself through 74 years of choices, both good and bad. Was I prepared to fight for it? "Yes," I said. "I'm prepared." That afternoon, in Robert's office, I learned exactly what I was up against. Michael had been thorough. I had to give him that. He'd compiled a list of what he called concerning behaviors. Living alone at my age, refusing to consider assisted living, making sudden changes to my estate planning, withdrawing large sums of money from my accounts. "None of this proves incompetence," Robert said, reading through the petition. "But presented to the right judge, it could raise questions about your decision-making capacity." "So what's our strategy?" "We prove that every decision you've made has been rational, well considered, and in your best interests. We get testimony from your doctors about your mental and physical health. We document your active involvement in community activities, your volunteer work, your social connections. We show that you're not an isolated, confused elderly woman making impulsive decisions, but a competent adult taking charge of her own life. And if we lose? Robert's expression was grim. If we lose, Michael becomes your guardian. He can force you to move into a facility, sell your house, control your finances. You'd essentially become a legal child again. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. I spent those 2 weeks preparing for the fight of my life. Literally. Dr. Martinez was my first ally. When I explained the situation, he was outraged. This is exactly the kind of age discrimination that makes my job difficult, he said, reviewing my medical records. Your blood pressure is better than most people half your age. Your cognitive tests are perfect. Your physical condition is excellent. For 74, there's absolutely no medical basis for claiming diminished capacity. He agreed to testify on my behalf and provided detailed medical records going back 5 years, all showing consistent good health and no signs of cognitive decline. Mrs. Chen from the library was equally supportive. Margaret is one of our most reliable volunteers, she told Robert. She manages complex schedules, works with challenging adult learners, handles money for our book sales. If she were showing signs of mental decline, I'd be the first to know, Atka. Banker, my investment advisor, even the manager at the grocery store where I shopped. All were willing to testify that I was sharp, engaged, and fully capable of managing my own affairs. But the most important ally was someone I hadn't expected. Patricia. She called me the evening before the hearing, her voice shaky and uncertain. Mrs. Whitman, it's Patricia, Michael's wife. Hello, Patricia. I need to tell you something. About the guardianship hearing tomorrow. I waited, surprised by the call. I don't agree with what Michael's doing. I've told him it's wrong, that you're perfectly capable of taking care of yourself. But he won't listen. He's obsessed with this idea that you're wasting his inheritance. I see. Mrs. Whitman, I know we've never been close. I know you probably think I don't like you very much. I've never thought about it either way, Patricia. You're my son's wife. That's enough for me. There was a long pause. Well, you should know that I've always respected you. The way you raised your children. The way you supported them even when they didn't deserve it. The way you've handled your husband's death, living independently, creating a life for yourself. I felt tears prick at my eyes, unexpected and welcome. Michael is making a mistake, she continued. And I can't be part of it anymore. I've told him I won't testify for him, and if his lawyer calls me as a witness, I'll tell the truth about what I've observed. Which is? That you're one of the most competent people I know. That you're handling your life better than most people half your age. That this whole thing is about money, not concern for your welfare. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine hope. Not just that I'd win the hearing, but that there were still people in the world who understood the difference between right and wrong. The hearing was held in a small courtroom that smelled of old wood and older disappointments. Michael sat at one table with his lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit who probably specialized in elder law. I sat at another table with Robert, feeling smaller than I had in years, but determined not to show it. Judge Harrison was a woman about my age, which I hoped would work in my favor. She had silver hair and sharp eyes, and she listened carefully as Michael's lawyer presented their case. It was brutal to sit there and hear my life described as a series of poor decisions and warning signs. My choice to live alone became social isolation. My volunteer work became confusion about appropriate activities for someone her age. My financial planning became erratic behavior, suggesting cognitive decline. Michael testified that he was concerned about my safety, my judgment, my ability to manage complex financial matters. He painted a picture of a confused old woman making impulsive decisions that put her at risk. His lawyer presented bank records showing the money I'd moved between accounts, the meetings I'd had with financial advisors, the changes to my estate, planning. Out of context, without explanation, it did look concerning. Then it was our turn. Robert began with Dr. Martinez, who testified about my excellent physical and mental health. He brought charts and test results, spoke in clear medical terms about my cognitive function, my reflexes, my overall well-being. Mrs. Chen testified about my volunteer work, my reliability, my ability to handle complex tasks and interact appropriately with people of all ages. My banker testified that my financial decisions had been conservative and well-reasoned, that I'd asked intelligent questions and made thoughtful choices. But the most powerful testimony came from Patricia. Michael's lawyer called her as a witness, expecting her to support their case. Instead, she told the truth. "I've observed Mrs. Whitman closely over the years," she said, her voice steady despite Michael's furious stare. "She's always been organized, thoughtful, and independent. Her house is immaculate. Her garden is beautiful. Her finances are in perfect order. She cooks for herself, drives safely, maintains an active social life. But surely you've noticed some decline in her abilities?" the lawyer pressed. "The only decline I've noticed is in my husband's respect for his mother. Mrs. Whitman is exactly the same competent, intelligent woman she's always been." Michael's face was bright red, but Patricia continued. "This isn't about Mrs. Whitman's capacity. It's about my husband's impatience with his inheritance." The lawyer tried to redirect, but the damage was done. Patricia had said what everyone in the room was thinking but hadn't been willing to voice. Finally, Judge Harrison asked me to testify on my own behalf. I stood up slowly, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to command the room's attention. I'd been a teacher for 30 years. I knew how to hold an audience. "Your Honor," I said, "I'm 74 years old. I've been managing my own life for more than half a century. I've raised 2 children, maintained a 32-year marriage, taught high school English for 3 decades, and managed my household finances since 1970. I paused, making eye contact with the judge. "I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes, poor decisions, choices I regret. But that's called being human, not being incompetent. The difference is that when I was younger, people called my mistakes learning experiences. Now that I'm older, they call them warning signs." I could see the judge nodding slightly. But age isn't a disease, Your Honor. It's an achievement. I've earned these 74 years through good choices and bad ones, through joy and sorrow, through success and failure. And I've earned the right to continue making my own choices until I'm genuinely unable to do so. I sat down to silence. Judge Harrison studied her notes for what felt like an eternity before speaking. "This case troubles me," she said finally. "Not because of Mrs. Whitman's competence. The evidence clearly shows she's fully capable of managing her own affairs. It troubles me because it represents something I see too often in this courtroom. Adult children who confuse concern with control." She looked directly at Michael. "Mr. Whitman, your mother is not required to make the choices you would make. She's not required to live where you think she should live, or spend her money the way you think she should spend it. The law protects Her right to make her own decisions, even if you disagree with them. Michael's lawyer started to object, but the judge held up her hand. I've heard enough. The petition for guardianship is denied. Mrs. Whitman retains complete control over her person and her property. Furthermore, I'm ordering that no further petitions regarding Mrs. Whitman's competence may be filed without clear medical evidence of cognitive decline. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. I walked out of that courtroom a free woman, but more than that, I walked out as someone who had fought for her rights and won. Michael left immediately, not speaking to anyone. Patricia lingered long enough to squeeze my hand and whisper, "I'm sorry." Then she was gone too, chasing after her angry husband and probably a very difficult conversation. But I wasn't thinking about Michael or Patricia, or even the victory I'd just won. I was thinking about Jennifer, who'd called that morning to wish me luck and promise she'd be there for whatever came next. I was thinking about my garden, waiting for me at home, about my volunteer work at the library, and the book club I'd joined, and the watercolor class that was teaching me it's never too late to try something new. I was thinking about all the people who'd supported me through this fight. Friends I'd forgotten I had. Professionals who'd gone beyond their job descriptions. Even strangers who'd simply treated me with the respect every human being deserves. Most of all, I was thinking about the letter in my desk drawer, and whether I still needed to send it. That evening, I sat in your grandfather's study and pulled out the letter I'd written to my children. I read it again, every word I'd written in anger and disappointment and pain. Then I tore it up. Not because Michael deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved better than carrying that anger around for whatever years I had left. Not because I'd changed my will back. I hadn't, and wouldn't. But because the real revenge wasn't about money. The real revenge was living well. I wrote a new letter. Shorter and simpler, Michael and Jennifer. Today I successfully defended my right to live my own life. The court found me fully competent to make my own decisions, manage my own affairs, and choose my own future. Jennifer, your support and changed attitude have meant everything to me. I look forward to building a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Michael, I hope that someday you'll understand that love isn't about control, and family isn't about inheritance. Until then, I wish you well, but I won't accept disrespect from anyone, including my own son. I am exactly who I've always been. Your mother, not your property. I hope you can learn to love me as I am, not as you wish I were. With conditional love that has learned its own worth, Mother. Seal this letter and put it in the drawer with the will. Unlike the first letter, this one would be delivered immediately. They both needed to understand where things stood. 3 months later, I'm sitting in my new apartment in Portland, Oregon, looking out at mountains I'd only seen in photographs before. You see, winning the right to make my own choices meant I could choose anything, including selling the house that had become more about the past than the future. The Cedar Falls Historical Society was thrilled to purchase it at fair market value. It's being converted into a community center and historical museum, with the garden preserved exactly as your grandfather and I created it. They've even put up a small plaque by the front door. The Harold and Margaret Whitman Community Center. Not bad for an old lady whose time was supposedly over. Jennifer visited twice before I moved, and she's planning to come to Portland next month. She's even talking about relocating here herself. Her company has a West Coast office, and she says she's ready for a change. Michael hasn't spoken to me since the hearing. Patricia sent a Christmas card with a note saying she was sorry for everything, but that was months ago. I don't know if they're still together, and I don't know if Michael will ever understand what he lost when he chose entitlement over relationship. But that's his choice to make, just like this was mine. I volunteer at the Portland Public Library now, in their adult literacy program. I've made friends in my building. People my age who've also chosen to start over, to write new chapters instead of just rereading old ones. We go to museums together, take day trips to the coast, have dinner parties where we talk about books, and politics and our children who think we're too old to have opinions. I'm taking a ceramics class and discovering I have a talent for throwing pottery. Who knew? At 74, I'm still learning new things about myself. Most importantly, I'm happy. Really, genuinely happy in a way I haven't been in years. Happy with my own company, happy with my choices, happy with a life that's finally, completely, my own. The money Michael was so eager to inherit? Well, it's doing good work. The Education Foundation has awarded its first scholarships. 5 young people who'll go to college because they worked hard and someone believed in them, not because they were born into privilege. And here's the beautiful irony. I have more money now than when I started this journey. Turns out that when you stop supporting adult children who see you as an ATM, your finances improve dramatically. Who would have thought? I still think about Granny's tales sometimes. About all of you who understand what it's like to be dismissed because of your age, treated like a burden because of your experience, told your time is over by people who haven't lived half of what you have. Well, I'm here to tell you, your time isn't over. It's just different. And different can be wonderful if you have the courage to embrace it. They say living well is the best revenge, and I've found that to be true. But it's not just about